Okay, so this is a beekeeping and gardening video. What I wanted to do is give you a brief overview of the various beekeeping diseases that have emerged and that people can watch out for in beekeeping. Now, this shouldn't be something that should scare you or make you worry too much because most of these diseases, they would come in waves. And when a beekeeping disease emerges, usually at that particular time period is when the beekeepers and the bees have trouble with it. But usually, as time passes, they learn how to beat it. So, even though we have all of these diseases that are still around, you don't hear about them as much anymore. And you don't hear about them causing as much damage, except for the most current one, usually. Like, for example, right now, the main beekeeping disease that people are worried about is varroa. We're still learning how to beat varroa. Varroa is the most recent one. We kind of have an idea how to beat it. It's just that it takes so much effort. It and you know there's so much chemicals and other things that are weakening the bees. So when you're taking care of honeybees, the biggest battle is getting them through winter because of both varroa and chemical poisoning that weakens it. And the chemicals are in the fields and being sprayed on the crops. See? Anyway, I'm going to sidestep that for a bit and we'll just go over the diseases and a brief idea of what they were. Okay, first, around the 1860s, American foul brood emerged, caused by the bacterium Paenibacillus larva. American foul brood was recognized as a significant disease affecting bee larvae. Now, there's still laws around that you're supposed to dispose of equipment when you find foul brood and other things in your colony. It was really that bad. So when they find foul brood, people will often burn the equipment that it was found in. They don't risk any contamination still because when that disease emerged, it was really bad. But I mean, we've learned how to beat it. You don't see foul brood anymore hardly. I mean, it does. It's still around, but it's not like the Black Plague or anything like that. All right, the next one that emerged was around 1900, and it was called Isle of Wight disease. Isle of Wight disease was an acarine disease, and it was a serious condition. It affected the respiratory systems of the bees. It was believed to be caused by Acarus woody, which is basically a wood mite. Um, so anyway, that emerged first off of the Isle of Wight, which is how it got its name, which is the off the coast of southern England, um, and infected bees had symptoms like they'd be crawling and unable to fly, premature aging, and it would mess up their trachea and respiratory systems and basically kill them off, and it would have a devastating effect. All right, going back to the other list now. I might go back into these diseases individually later, but the idea is to just give you a brief overview. After Isle of Wight disease emerged, around the 1910s, European foul brood emerged. That was caused by the bacterium Melissococcus plutonius. European foul brood became a recognized issue, particularly in Europe and later in the US. I did some checking. European foul brood is not related to Isle of Wight disease. They're completely different. And that's worth noting because they kind of emerged around a, not too long, not too far apart from each other in time. In the 1940s, Um, People have marked and written varroa emerged then, but it didn't really become a problem until much later. It wasn't recognized. Now, the difference is that varroa was first emerged in Asia in this time period of the 50s. It did become a pest there, but Asian honeybees from Asia, which are a different strain than ours, they adapted to fight it a lot quicker. See, so mm, right now they can fight it, but the European and Westernized bees can't. Now the problem is they are totally different strains of bees. They can't even mate with each other, so you can't transfer the genetics of how to fight that into the Western bees from these others because they're incompatible species. They have significantly different genes and behavior traits also. For example, the Asian honeybees have this um, thing they do with defensive waves to knock predator wasps and other things to keep them out of the um, colonies. They also do bee ball clusters around predators much more than westernized bees. Westernized bees don't really do that unless they're balling a queen. It's kind of like they've forgotten how to do it in their genes or something because they know how to do it from when they're balling a queen, but they don't seem to know that they could do the same with, like a enemy predator coming in. Asian honeybees do that. It's like their main defense instead of secondary. Anyway, that's a side note. So, 1950s, chalkbrood emerged. Chalkbrood was a big problem in the U.S. It was really awful, and when you see it, and you can find pictures and how and descriptions of how it used to look. It was really messy, and anyway. Okay, now in the 1980s, that was when the varroa mites truly began to take off. People will tell you in the 80s, before before varroa hit them, that you didn't even have to try to be successful in beekeeping hardly. I mean, it was like, I mean, it, you still had to work, but it wasn't like it is now. Now, beekeeping is immense work, immense worry, and you can't even tell if you're going to have bees from one year to the next because it's so difficult. Um, but before varroa came along, it was much more enjoyable and much more stable. Now, they write that varroa emerged in the 80s, but people don't really write that it actually became such an uphill battle until much later, meaning varroa didn't take off immediately everywhere all at the same time. It kind of went around in waves. Around the mid 80s, Nosema disease came out also. That was another problematic one. Nosema was caused by microsporidian parasites, the Nosema apis, and later Nosema ceranae. Um, and Nosema became recognized as an issue affecting adult bees, especially. Um, Now, when you're looking at the historical data on beekeeping diseases, they write colony collapse disorder as kind of a separate illness starting around the mid 2000s, and it was characterized by the sudden loss of adult bees and just the colony just collapsing. Um, I'm not sure I would classify colony collapse disorder as a separate disease because it's believed that colony collapse disorder came from the combination of chemical saturation in the hive mixed with varroa problems. So in a way, varroa is kind of the main component of colony collapse disorder, and varroa is its own, you know, its own beekeeping disease. So I'm not sure I would classify them as separate. And that's significant because, see, when you're trying to figure out how to solve a problem, you look at the sum of the forces, the sum of what's going on, and you identify the individual parts. And that's what you want to do. All right. So after colony collapse disorder, you had small hive beetle emerging. People write that small hive beetle emerged in the mid 90s, but that it didn't really become a significant concern until the 2000s. But most people will tell you that the bees can they can work with their bees to contain small hive beetle. It's not the biggest monster to fight like varroa is. The losing your colonies over winter, in conjunction with varroa is still the biggest problem. I'm not saying that small hive beetle isn't bad though. People don't like having that in there, and it can mess up a colony. But you usually don't find small hive beetle messing up all of your colonies. Small hive beetle is also tends to be confined to mostly fairly temperate areas like the south of the U.S., like the area between kind of Texas and Virginia. It usually doesn't do as well in the really far northern states. You would find it all over places like Georgia, Florida, Louisiana, places like that. But at a certain point, it doesn't really get that far north um, like it does in those areas. It doesn't do as well. Now, in the 2010 time period, 2010s, deformed wing virus emerged. It had been known about for quite a while, but that's when it became more prominent. Um, Deformed wing virus, it got listed as a separate disease and illness, but it's actually a varroa mite infestation problem. And the way it works is varroa, they, when varroa are breeding, they go into the cells where the bees are growing into from infant to adult bees in those little cell in the cells where they have the cap on in the cluster, and they lay eggs inside the cell with the growing infant bee that's going through its chrysalis phase to become an adult bee. And they're basically these little tiny varroa mites. They start biting into the body of the growing bee and sucking out blood and nutrients from that bee, and they pull so much energy out that the places where they've bit into don't form properly, and that's where you get deformed wing virus from. You can find other information on that. This isn't my opinion. This is just, you know, what people had discovered and documented. But I had hoped to, create a video that would kind of summarize all this information, because usually people, when they hear about these diseases, they kind of worry they're going to get them. But if you look at them, they're in a historical table emerging, just about every 20 years, 20 or 30 years, there's a new beekeeping disease that comes along. And then when the bees beat them, they don't usually, you don't usually have a massive collapse after the bees figure out how to beat it. They kind of move on, which means that the disease will still be around, and occasionally you'll see maybe one or two colonies catch that disease, but you don't usually lose everything to the degree that to the degree that things are happening now. Now with varroa, that's completely different. Now, you notice I didn't include Africanized bees as a disease. That's a separate issue. It will be interesting to do a video on Africanized bees later also, but that's not really a disease. So I will do that separately. That's it for now.